Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, January 26th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. and Israel advance major fighter jet deals. So amid Israel's slaughter in Gaza, U.S. and Israeli officials met in Washington this week to discuss the advancement of major weapons deals that will arm Israel with dozens of fighter jets, Apache helicopters, and munitions. One of these deals includes a new squadron of 25 F-35 fighter jets and is worth about $3 billion. So Israel's defense ministry first announced its intention to procure the 25 F-35s last summer. And when they made that announcement, they said these jets would be purchased using U.S. military aid. So that's right, the U.S. taxpayer is footing the bill for this. Sources told the Times of Israel that Israel also intends to procure a squadron of 25 F-15IA fighter jets and a squadron of 12 Apache helicopters. It's unclear how the F-15s and Apaches will be paid for, but we do know that the U.S. is looking to give Israel an additional $14 billion in military aid, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's paid for by the U.S. And that's on top of the $3.8 billion that Israel receives each year. So this was the Israeli official that went to the U.S. to have these meetings was Israeli Defense Ministry Director General Eyal Zamir. He met with senior State Department and Pentagon officials to discuss the fighter jets and helicopters. The next step, it was kind of vague what exactly they agreed to, but they agreed to push forward these deals. And according to the Times of Israel, the next step is for both governments to formally approve these deals, and that's expected to happen in the coming weeks. And the actual delivery of the fighter jets and the helicopters will take a few years. But he was also discussing the continued supply of American bombs and other types of munitions to support the Israeli slaughter in Gaza. The U.S. has delivered over 10,000 tons of weapons to Israel since October 7th, demonstrating the strong U.S. support for Israel's campaign, which has killed over 25,000 Palestinians. The latest numbers from Gaza's health ministry is 25,900, and that includes 10,000 children. 10,000 children. And this is what the U.S. is doing while that's happening. They're working to get them new fighter jets, new helicopters, so they could drop more bombs on Palestinians. All right, so, I mean, it just goes to show that they're doing nothing to put any sort of pressure on Israel about the civilian casualties. If they're like, yeah, we'll sell you fighter jets, and well, not sell you, we'll give you fighter jets that we're paying for, and Apache helicopters, and more bombs, more weapons. It's all just a show. Any concern that they express, it's all just a show. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces flatten Gaza border areas to create a militarized zone. So Israel is destroying buildings and flattening areas of Gaza on the Israeli border to create a so-called buffer zone that Israel will militarize. And this shows the long-term plans that Israel has to occupy the Gaza Strip. According to the Wall Street Journal, Israeli soldiers began working in November in an area in northern Gaza to create a wasteland roughly 1 kilometer in width. So this Israeli soldier who spoke to the Wall Street Journal said, quote, "Everything has been flattened. It was mostly agricultural. Now it's a military zone, a complete no man's land," end quote. So what little farmland that they have in Gaza is, some of it is being destroyed for this purpose. 1 kilometer wide, so it's about, what, 0.6 miles? And the plan is to do that around the whole entire Gaza Strip. So 21 Israeli soldiers were recently killed while planting explosives in a central Gaza neighborhood near the border as part of work to destroy Gaza's border areas. A Hamas rocket hit a nearby tank, detonating the explosives and collapsing the building. So according to a recent report from Israel's Channel 12 News, Israeli forces have already destroyed 1,100 of the 2,800 buildings in the border areas. So they're making pretty quick work of this if they've destroyed 1,100 buildings in these areas already. Israeli officials have not confirmed the figures, but they have acknowledged that they're creating a buffer zone to prevent a future October 7th style attack. That's their excuse for what they're doing here. And Israeli officials claim that the work is being done to dismantle terrorist infrastructure, but the fact that the Israeli soldiers can go into the buildings, plant the explosives, and walk out shows that there's no threat emanating from these buildings that they're destroying. So Financial Times reported that the U.S. opposes the plans to take over Gaza's border territory. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said on Tuesday that the U.S. does, quote, not want to see the territory of Gaza reduced in any way, end quote. But, of course, doesn't matter. They don't really care because they're going to keep giving them bombs and planes and stuff to continue these the destruction of Gaza. All right, so the next one here. So this is an article from Al Jazeera. Well, it's kind of an interactive thing, and it's titled Know Their Names, and they publish the names of Palestinian children who were killed in Gaza. They say it's about half of the names that they published, and they separated them by age. So I was just scrolling through this earlier today, and you hear these numbers, and it's hard to really think of the scale. But here's a section of babies who didn't even reach their first birthday, and just if you see here, look at this. I mean, how far down I have to scroll to get through this list of just babies under 1 that have been killed. I mean, it's just so horrific. And then 1-year-olds. Scroll through that. I mean, I think it's just something that kind of gives you the sense of the scale of the number of children that are being killed in this. Babies, toddlers. I mean, it's just horrific beyond words, really. So I figured I would put that up there. And, that's right under the story about the U.S. giving them more fighter jets to bomb more Palestinians. All right, so the next one here, CIA chief to discuss Gaza hostage talks in Europe. So CIA Director William Burns will travel to Europe in the coming days to hold talks about the hostage negotiations between Israel and Gaza. And this was reported by multiple media outlets on Thursday. So Burns is expected to meet with David Barnea. He's the head of the Israeli Mossad spy agency. He's also going to be meeting with Qatar's Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, and Egypt's intelligence chief, Abbas Kamel. Egypt and Qatar have been mediating the latest negotiations between Israel and Hamas. There have been conflicting reports on whether or not progress is being made in the talks. Israel is said to have offered a 2-month truce in exchange for the release of all remaining Israeli hostages being held in Gaza, which is believed to be just over 100 people. But Hamas is calling for a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of all Israeli troops in exchange for the release of the remaining hostages. So, again, there's kind of conflicting media reports about how these hostage negotiations are going. But maybe this is a sign that something's coming close if Burns is going over there. But we'll see. I mean, it's tough. It's really tough to know because then you have Netanyahu coming out and rejecting the things Hamas has put forward and saying he's going to, he seems very determined to keep everything going. So I would be surprised if he does agree to a truce for as long as 2 months. And then there's the other reports saying that they're talking about 1 month with less hostages. But we'll see if this, bears any fruit. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. will not say if it will respect the ICJ ruling on Gaza genocide case. So the U.S. is refusing to say if it will respect an upcoming ruling from the UN's International Court of Justice on South Africa's genocide case against Israel that could order a halt to Israel's onslaught in Gaza. The ruling on whether Israel is committing genocide will take years, but South Africa has asked the ICJ to issue an interim order for Israel to pause its military operations. The ICJ is scheduled to make a decision on the interim order on Friday. So our friend, State Department spokesman Vedant Patel, he was asked about this on Thursday. And it kind of seems like a simple question. Basically, the question is, if the ICJ makes a ruling, do you think the parties should abide by that ruling? And he couldn't answer the question. He said, quote, "I would not opine on anything like that, given this is a legal process, and I'm not going to hypothesize or speculate on any kind of outcome," end quote. So essentially what he's saying is, it depends on the ruling. And, you know, it's just so, this type of stuff just really shows the U.S. hypocrisy to the world. How for the past couple of years we've been hearing all about this rules-based order and all the lecturing they've done to Russia. They're supporting the case against Russia, against Putin at the International Criminal Court, the ICC. And they've been, you know, helping out with these investigations of alleged Russian war crimes. Now, when it comes to Israel, they're saying, well, you know, we can't get ahead of ourselves here. And Patel also repeated the U.S. objection to the case. He said, quote, "The allegations that Israel is committing genocide we believe to be unfounded," end quote. And he also called, so the reporter that asked him the question pointed out to his previous comments when he called the ICJ an important judicial organ and said that it plays a vital role in peaceful settlements of disputes. And then I saw, so if you watch, there's a video here from Decensored News of the press conference. And if you watch, you see Matt Lee, who's a reporter for AP, who usually gives them a, you know, he asks good questions. He just pointed out the hypocrisy, how the U.S., he specifically pointed to the ICJ ruling about the Philippines and China, about their maritime dispute. The ICJ ruled in favor of the Philippines. So the U.S. is always like pointing to that whenever they're talking about the South China Sea. China should abide by the ICJ ruling. But then, you know, in this situation, it's one of their allies, so they're not going to agree with it or say that anybody should abide by it. But anyway, that decision is coming Friday. And again, it's not the ruling on whether or not Israel's committing genocide. It's something that South Africa wants them to issue an emergency order to say, stop what you're doing in Gaza. They don't have power to enforce it, but I think it would really increase the international pressure on Israel and on the U.S. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. confirms the talks on the U.S. military presence in Iraq. So Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin confirmed on Thursday that the U.S. and Iraq will start talks on the future of the U.S. military presence in Iraq in the coming days, and this could potentially result in a U.S. withdrawal, and that would be amazing. Iraq has been calling for an end to the presence of the U.S.-led anti-ISIS coalition as the U.S. has been bombing Iraq, and the tensions are really soaring with these Shia militias targeting U.S. bases in both Iraq and Syria over the slaughter that's happening in Gaza. And Iraq is on the brink of another major war. It's the last thing anybody in Iraq needs. And Austin said that the two countries will convene a meeting of the U.S.-Iraq Higher Military Commission, which was formed last summer, signaling that the U.S. wants to maintain some sort of presence in Iraq. Austin said that the HMC will, quote, "enable the transition to an enduring bilateral security partnership between the United States and Iraq," end quote. So that kind of sounds like they might want to keep some kind of troop presence, maybe not under this code. Like, they're probably going to try to finagle something here, saying that they want a enduring bilateral security partnership. So there are about 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq as part of the anti-ISIS coalition known as Operation Inherent Resolve. In recent years, the U.S. presence in Iraq has been about pushing back against Iran. We saw them kill Soleimani, the Iranian general, back in 2020 in Baghdad. And ISIS has been reduced to small remnants in the country. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani says Iraq can handle it. They don't need the U.S. They don't need the other foreign troops. Austin said that the transition in the U.S. presence depends on the three factors: the threat from ISIS, the operational and environmental requirements, which sounds very vague, and the Iraqi security forces' capability levels. So hopefully, again, I'm being a little pessimistic sounding maybe. Hopefully this does lead to the end of the U.S. presence in Iraq. That would be so good. Unfortunately, this sounds like it's going to be a long process. U.S. officials are kind of making it seem like it's going to be a few months of talks. So we'll see. And this also could just be an effort for them to cool tensions and hopefully maybe try to placate. That's probably might be the U.S. thinking, to placate kind of the anti-U.S. forces in Iraq. So there's also been reports that indicate the U.S. is also considering ending its military occupation of eastern Syria. So one thing that as far as I understand it, the U.S. occupation of eastern Syria relies on support from Iraq, from the U.S. presence in Iraq. So there's about 900 troops in eastern Syria, and the U.S. also backs the SDF, that's the Kurdish group. So that gives the U.S. controls a significant chunk of Syria's territory. Sources within the Pentagon and the State Department told Foreign Policy that the White House is no longer invested in sustaining a mission that it perceives as unnecessary. And this article in Foreign Policy is pretty funny because it's Charles Lister, who's a total neocon, pro-Syria proxy warrior. And it says, America is planning to withdraw from Syria and create a disaster. So he's not happy about it. But I'm very happy to hear these reports because the U.S. presence in Iraq and Syria is just a tripwire for a major war. And the U.S. is also waging a brutal economic war against Syria with crippling sanctions, and they occupy their oil fields. Really, just ending that would be great. But anyway, so just seems like very preliminary discussions that are happening. Nobody's saying that they're going to get out, but they're discussing it. There was also a report from Al Monitor that said the Pentagon floated a plan for the SDF, for the Kurdish SDF, to partner with the Syrian government of President Bashar al-Assad. So, which is interesting because that's something I've been saying for years, that if the U.S. leaves, the Kurds are just going to work it out with Assad, and that'll benefit probably Turkey because then the Arab troops can deploy to the Turkish border regions. That would make Turkey happy. I think it's a way it can resolve a lot of issues. And then all of them are anti-ISIS, so they can deal with the ISIS remnants. But so the idea that the Pentagon is floating that, according to this report, seems kind of like a big deal. And that's something when Trump said he was going to pull out of Syria, both in 2018 and 2019. He never did it, unfortunately. But when he said he was going to do it, the SDF was saying, I remember one quote, I think it was 2019, one of the SDF officials said, we could just partner, talk to Damascus. That's always an option for us, basically threatening that if you leave, we're going to, work with the Syrian government. U.S. officials told Politico that a withdrawal from Syria or Iraq is not imminent, but did acknowledge there are conversations within the Biden administration about pulling troops out of Syria. However, there was a U.S. official who told CNN that the U.S. was not considering leaving Syria. So again, I think it's very preliminary, but the situation really could explode. So that I'm sure that is speeding up the thinking and the conversations. So it would be really great if they got out. And this would be a good time for, the people in Congress who introduced these resolutions to pull out of Syria, pull out of Iraq, to do it again, to build up that pressure again. It seems like they never do it when it really matters. All right, so the next one here, U.S. officials think North Korea may attack South Korea. So this article is from Kyle Anselon at the Libertarian Institute, and it says U.S. officials now believe that North Korea will conduct a lethal attack against South Korea. And this is based on a report from the New York Times, although the U.S. assesses that North Korea will attempt to limit its attack to avoid a full-scale war. So the New York Times report said that the officials have assessed that Kim's recent harder line is part of a pattern of provocations, but that his declarations have been more aggressive than previous statements and should be taken seriously. While the officials added that they did not see an imminent risk of a full-scale war on the Korean Peninsula, Kim could carry out strikes in a way that he thinks would avoid rapid escalation. There's recently an article in 38 North by North Korea experts Robert Carlin and Siegfried Hecker warning of a potential war on the peninsula. Their article said, quote, "The literature on surprise attacks should make us very wary of the comfortable assumptions that resonate in Washington's echo chamber, but might not have purchase in Pyongyang. This might seem like madness, but history suggests those who have convinced themselves that they have no good options left will take the view that even the most dangerous game is worth the candle," end quote. And then there was John Pfeffer writing over at Responsible Statecraft. He was saying to take the warning from those two guys seriously, but he also explained that Kim's fiery statements might signal that Pyongyang seeks peace and not war, hoping that it could lead to negotiations, could lead to the U.S. saying, all right, maybe we should back down here. One thing that they recently did was North Korea is going to declare South Korea like an enemy. They're going to no longer work toward reconciliation or reunification. And this is a result of the U.S. and South Korea restarting these huge war games, these provocative war games. Some even simulate assassinations of Kim Jong-un. And the North Korea responds by firing missiles and artillery, and the tensions it's just tit-for-tat escalation. And it is one of those situations that most people ignore, kind of just used to these things happening on the Korean Peninsula. Same way people were just used to Gaza being under blockade for all these years. You know, you never know when this stuff could really explode. And there's nukes involved here. The U.S. recently sent a nuclear-armed submarine to South Korea as one of its provocations. All right, so the next one here, Congressional Delegation meets with Taiwan's president-elect. So a U.S. congressional delegation visited Taiwan on Thursday to affirm bipartisan support for the first time since the island held presidential elections earlier this month. So this is Representative Mario Diaz-Balart and Representative Ami Bera, so a Republican and a Democrat. They're co-chairs of the Congressional Taiwan Caucus. They met with Taiwanese President-elect Lai Ching-te, who is currently the vice president and a member of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. Taiwan's current president, Tsai Ing-wen, has overseen 8 years of a significant escalation in tensions with mainland China as her government forged stronger military and diplomatic ties with the U.S. More of the same is expected when Lai is inaugurated in May, although the opposition party Kuomintang, which seeks to ease tensions with Beijing, won the most seats in the legislative yuan. So Lai took aim at China in comments he made while meeting with these U.S. members of Congress, explicitly mentioned China. He said, quote, "Taiwan is situated in the first island chain and stands at the front line of China's authoritarian expansionism. This makes Taiwan a crucial strategic location. Stability across the Taiwan Strait is extremely important to regional and global peace and prosperity. I hope the United States can continue to firmly support Taiwan, deepen bilateral cooperation and relations, and work with other democratic partners to ensure peace and prosperity in the region," end quote. And he also called for more military support from the U.S., saying that he hopes Congress can help Taiwan bolster its self-defense capabilities. And in 2023, we saw the U.S. start providing Taiwan with unprecedented military aid since 1979, which is the year the U.S. and Taiwan cut off diplomatic relations. The U.S. has sold weapons to Taiwan, but in 2023, they started giving them military aid, free of charge, not free of charge for the U.S. taxpayer, but free of charge for Taiwan. Relatively small packages when we're talking about other countries that the U.S. gives aid to, but still very significant and symbolic step that really, really angered China. And China does not like these congressional visits to Taiwan. Especially, I'm sure they're not going to be happy about this one. I haven't seen any comments. They might have made them. I wrote this up much earlier in the day. If you remember back in August 2022 when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan when she was the House Speaker, China responded by launching its largest ever military drills around Taiwan. The diplomatic stuff really, they really don't like. So they view this type of engagement as a violation of, the one China policy and everything. So tensions are high, and, the U.S. and China have been talking more, but tensions are still high. A day before Lai met with the visiting U.S. lawmakers, a U.S. the U.S. sailed a warship through the Taiwan Strait. So the U.S. is continuing those types of provocations in the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea. And, of course, China responded, calling it a provocation and denouncing it and everything. I really need to kind of pay more attention to China and Taiwan and the South China Sea and stuff. I've been so wrapped up in all this stuff in the Middle East. All right, so the last story here. Biden urges Congress to approve F-16 sale to Turkey. So this is Erdogan's big reward. He's been wanting this big F-16 deal for a while. It's worth $20 billion. It includes F-16s and modernization kits to upgrade their other F-16s. And President Biden wants to give Erdogan his reward for approving Sweden's membership into NATO. And he sent a letter to Congress telling them to approve this without delay. He says, let's speed this thing up. Get the man his F-16s. So I know that the big opposition in Congress was from Bob Menendez, who was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but he stepped down because of the allegations of corruption and bribery, that he was doing things on behalf of the Egyptian government. And when that happened, Erdogan actually said, all right, now let's get this deal through. Menendez is gone. He's still a senator, but he stepped down from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So we'll see. I think they probably will push this through pretty quick, I would guess. And Sweden still needs Hungary to approve its NATO bid. So Kristersson, the Swedish prime minister, he has accepted the invitation from Orban, the Hungarian prime minister, to discuss Sweden joining NATO. So we'll see if that... I also assume that Hungary will probably ratify Sweden's membership pretty soon. That is it for the news for today. Please check out our viewpoints. One from Daniel McAdams: neocon freak out as Biden contemplates Iraq-Syria withdrawal. And he's talking about that foreign policy article. And, you know, the slightest hint of them considering a withdrawal, the neocons are freaking out. It's good when the neocons are unhappy. One from Ted Snyder: U.S.-China policy is not going according to plan. One from Medea Benjamin and Nicholas J.S. Davies: Biden must choose between a Gaza ceasefire and regional war. One from Giorgio Cafiero: Saudi Arabia has most to lose if U.S. strikes in Yemen go sideways. And one from Connor O'Keefe: Biden's Middle East policy puts Americans at risk. So please go check all of that out. That's it for me for this week. I hope everyone has a good weekend. You could always support this show by sharing it, liking, subscribing, and all that. So another thing, so Friday, we'll find out soon about the ICJ ruling on the genocide thing, if they order a halt to the Israeli operations. But anyway, I'll be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.